Before revival, Allison was just a wonderful daughter. She really was. She was lost, but she was a wonderful daughter. She was respectful. She was very responsible in her life with her work and the goals that she had set for herself. As far as her relationship with me, she was just marvelous. She was helpful, caring, and a supportive daughter in the home. But she was very depressed with her own life, her own social life, and her own things that really were important to her. She didn't feel like that she was making any progress, and she was successful in almost every area, but she was extremely unhappy.
I was going downhill inside much quicker than I had. I was just so depressed. It was like I was getting more depressed every day. I was getting more unhappy every day. I was thinking something has got to give here.
Allison was moving deeper into the depression, just deeper into her unhappiness. And she was at such a low point when revival came that she knew that that was the answer. That night when she went to revival, Steve preached the sermon, take hold of the hand of the Lord and let go of the hand of the world. And Allison had a hold of both of those hands. She had God's, she was trying to hold on to God and trying to hold on to the hand of the world because she didn't see any life in God. She didn't see any life at church or any meaning or any power.
The night that I went to revival and got saved, I believe it was a Sunday night. It was a week after Steve had first come, and revival had been going on every night, and we had not gone to it because I didn't want to go, and I didn't know what to think about it. But again, Mom drug us there. I was there with her and my youngest sister, and we were sitting on the very back row, very back pew on the bottom floor, as far away as we could get without being in the balcony.
And that night when she sat on the pew right beside me, she never went to an altar call. She never raised her hand. She never moved toward God in a physical way. But she laid her soul down that night just in the pew when Steve preached that sermon. And she was transformed just sitting by me in the pew, never to be the same again. Because her heart was so, at such a point, that she was at the point of just giving up her life, her physical life, because it would have been such a relief, she thought. But when she heard that sermon that night, she knew what she had to do, and she was totally willing to do it. And that was the point where the Lord saved her and transformed her whole life.
After that, somehow I was able to get up out of the pew and go forward to get prayer. And it was like that was my altar call. I had prayed, and I was willing to walk down in front of all these people that I knew and get prayer from Steve, who I wasn't even really sure of yet. I wasn't sure of revival and what was going on, but I was able to put all that aside and just say, God, if this is you, this is what I want. I want you. And so I went down for prayer, and Steve prayed for me, and whoever else was praying prayed for me. And at the beginning, I never even fell down. I never fell out in the spirit. I never shook or jittered, or my hands didn't shake. Nothing happened. But I knew that this was what I wanted. I was going to go after it, and nothing had to happen. I just wanted God, and I knew He was there. And so I left that night. I came home, and it wasn't until the next morning I got up, and I remember sitting in our kitchen and telling my mom, I said, Mom, I got saved last night. And I didn't even know until the next morning. It was wonderful that the depression was gone. The unhappiness was gone. The fear was gone. Everything that had kept me so weighted down, it was gone. It was just in my heart, and it was in my mind, and nothing happened to my body. But I was a new person. I had never been happier in my life. I'd never been more peaceful and more settled to just be with God. It was awesome. It was an awesome thing. God was just, He was just performing a work in them, even from the beginning.
for His plan, and He's still performing that work in all of them. They're all ministers of the gospel, and it's the most blessing that any parent could ever ask for.
All over the world, thousands of people have seen the dramatic testimony of Elizabeth Ward on video.
So He got me up there, and I said, God, I can't go any farther than this. I can't lift, I'm not going to go up off this ground. And I guess it came down to that I didn't have the faith in Him to pick me up off the ground. But then He let go of my hand, and my hand began to shake just very, very fast, just up in the air. And then I just lost all my strength, and I fell to the ground. And I said, God, what are you doing? And He told me that it was just like in my life. If I had faith, He could take me anywhere. But if I didn't have the faith, He would if I couldn't hold on to Him and He couldn't hold on to me, then my life would go like my hand was going, and I would fall. And that would be my life. My life would be a disaster if I didn't hold on to Him. And so I understood that. And many things happened.
Amy was extremely beautiful, extremely intelligent, very opinionated, very bold, very hateful. She seemed to be loveless. She seemed to be so distant. It was very difficult to communicate with her. She had her own opinion. She had her own intentions. She had her own thoughts about the way she was going to live her life. If she didn't want to do something, it didn't matter. Wild horses couldn't force her to do it.
Before the revival, I grew up a very rebellious child. I was like that from the time I was born. It wasn't something I picked up along the way and just became as I got older. It was something that I was from the moment I was born. Before revival, Elizabeth, I can't even call her Elizabeth before revival. I have to call her Amy, because to me, Amy and Elizabeth are two totally different people. And a lot of times people come to the Lord and they say, yes, I'm different, and they are different. Like even me, I was different, but I wasn't that different. I wasn't as different as she was. She's nothing like Amy was before revival. Amy was mean. She was hateful. She didn't care about anybody. All she wanted was what she wanted to make her happy at that moment, and didn't care who she had to hurt to get it, how mean she was to get it, what she had to do to make herself feel good. She was just eaten up with sin and meanness. Her whole life she was like that. She was mean as a little girl, and she got more and more into the world, more and more into sin, and before revival she was the worst she'd ever been. And in our home, my mom has always been a Christian. She's always pushed God and do things right because it's right, and don't rebel, don't drink, don't smoke, don't hang out with people that do that, it was always just walk the straight and narrow, and I hated that. From the depth of my being, I hated that. I hated do right. I loved do wrong.
But she was so hard and so resistant. She had so much sin in her, so much iniquity. It was so strong in her that it took a violent encounter with God. I call it was like a Saul of Tarsus experience with Amy.
And so the first night I went, I don't remember any of the preaching, any of the altar call. I mean, I don't even know if he gave an altar call. But at the end of the service, Allison was like, come up to the altar with me. And I was like, I don't want to go to the altar. I'm just going to sit here until y'all are ready to go, and then we'll go home. And so I sat there for like probably an hour or so, a long time. Allison kept coming back. She'd go up to the altar, and then she'd come back and say, please come with me. And I was like, I don't want to go. And whenever she came back and said, please go with me, I don't want to stand up there by myself. I felt sorry for her. Because I always kind of felt sorry for her. She was more timid and shy, and I was more, okay, I'll go with you. I don't want you to stand by yourself. So I went up there. So I stood up there for 2.5 hours. I was very stubborn. I was going to have my way. And I waited for him. He kept passing by me, and he'd like pray for everybody around me, and then he'd look at me and smile and just keep right on going. And I was like, this guy's got an attitude. I mean, because I had an attitude, and I thought everybody else had an attitude.
And I thought, he doesn't want to pray for me. I must look like somebody he doesn't like or something, you know. That was the only reason why I could figure out he wouldn't pray for me. So I was like, well, fine, I'll just stand here, and he's going to pray for me, because if I'm the last person standing here and he doesn't pray for me, he's going to look bad, you know.
And finally, it must have been around 11 o'clock at night, I don't remember the time, that Steve came back by. One of those times he had gone back and forth, and he just barely said more, Lord, to her, and she was thrown to the floor and was on the floor for 3 to 4 hours. And so many things happened when she was on that floor. God was just physically and literally with, if you've ever seen God with someone, he was with her on that floor.
They said it looked like somebody hooked me up to an electric, you know, plug, because they said from my head to my feet would shake, and it was like I was almost off the ground. It would shake so hard. But it didn't hurt, and I can't say that I've ever really understood it, but all I knew was that inside I was changed, and inside, as all that was going on, God was healing me inside.
When Elizabeth came home shaking from the revival, I wasn't scared. There was nothing scary about it. I knew that it was God. I knew that what God was doing in her. I mean, I had seen her drunk. I had seen her pass out from alcohol, and I thought, she was looking for such a rush from alcohol. She was looking for such a rush from these parties and this music and this drug that she would put in her body, and that would make her pass out. That would make her fall down on the floor and just act like a fool and not even know who was going to bring her home, not even know how she was going to get home. I thought, just because she's shaking, if it's God, you know, she's been looking for something like this. That was the counterfeit. This is the real.
And you just can't tell me that it wasn't God. I am a mother. I had 3 daughters. I've seen them go through hell, and I've seen God. I've seen him move upon their bodies. I've seen him change their hearts. I've seen him rebirth their spirits and renew their minds. And I've just seen him. I haven't seen his body or his face, but I have literally seen him present with them. And I never saw a manifestation before that night, and I've never had a doubt that it was God. Never. I've never looked back, never turned back thinking that, well, maybe this isn't God. Maybe this is, you know, something weird. No, it's God.
All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I felt life. And it wasn't something that I had to go drink to get. It wasn't a fulfillment that I had to get from alcohol or from boyfriends or from friends at school or from accomplishing things. It was something that was there. It was something that was more real than anything I had ever known. It was more real than my own body. And at that point my whole life was changed, because I thought, this is what I want. This feeling inside of me is what I want. And what it was the love of God. It wasn't some preacher staring down my throat saying, you know, quit sinning, quit drinking, sit in church and be boring. It was the love of God. It was the life of God that entered my spirit. And I've never been the same.
In fact, if you look back over the history of revival, many of the major key factors of revival were young people. You've got Charity, who's been singing every night practically from day one. You've got Elizabeth and Allison Ward, you know, who were very instrumental parts in the very beginning of it. You have the sweeping of the schools. We went from 3 campus clubs before revival to now over 30 campus clubs, you know, and where they're effectively reaching, you know, their schools and so forth. So the young people were when you go outside of Brownsville, you don't hear very much about the young people, but the young people were very much a strong part, and still are, a foundation and spearheading of the revival. It's like every other revival through church history. It's always been through the younger generation that I think is not so set, you know, in their ways. They're more open for new things, that type of thing. And even though our whole church was ready, our young people was definitely a large part of that.
God has come down in our youth services in a tremendous way. And Richard Crisco, our youth pastor, has been tremendously used by God and is being tremendously used by God. The youth group now has penetrated our schools with fire and with the fire of revival in their hearts, and they're actively witnessing in the schools. And we have Bible clubs, I think, in all 30 of the schools in Escambia County now.
The power of God would fall in our youth services every week. I mean, you know, the praise and worship was totally transformed. You know, whereas before, you know, it was almost, you know, it was just that, a song service. Now you have teenagers that just exploded out of the pew. You couldn't keep them in the pew. They were exploding out of their chairs so that they could dance and rejoice before the Lord. And as they begin to worship the Lord in spirit and in truth and in unity and with all their heart, the Spirit of the Lord would fall. And, you know, they would be manifested in many different ways. I mean, sometimes you would have, literally, without even anybody laying hands on them, you would have, you know, crowds of teenagers begin to fall into the power of God and shake, and some of them would begin to experience trances, visions, you see many times would be slain in the Spirit. And this is not only church kids. We're talking about teenagers that had no church background whatsoever. There were teenagers that, you know, I refer to them as snots. They were teenagers, they were just snots. I mean, didn't love God. They didn't love one another. They didn't love anybody but themselves. And they would experience the power of God, and they may shake or fall, or some of them didn't do anything. But their lives were totally transformed. And they loved God. The glory of the Lord is on them. You couldn't keep them out of church. They were there 7 nights a week. It was just the most incredible thing I ever experienced in my life. You know, so it's not just church teenagers who had been set up and who had been brainwashed. I mean, teenagers coming from out of gangs and out of drugs and out of bad situations, coming there being totally transformed by the power of God in our services. Typically, we'll open up with 1 to 3 songs just to kind of get the teenagers in, get their mindset, everything's starting here. Then I like to go ahead and get rid of announcements, you know, those type of things, all the evils that you have to have in youth ministry. Take care of our announcements. And then we go into praise and worship. And usually we have at least an hour of praise and worship. Sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 hours of praise and worship. But I release my worship team and I tell them, your goal and your responsibility as worship team is to bring us into the presence of the Lord. Anything less than that, you've blown it. And I have nailed them before. You know, I said, we don't come here for good music. We don't come here for good sermons. We come here to meet God. That's our number one ambition and goal on Thursday night, is to meet God. And then after that, I'll preach my heart out. You know, and like I said, I usually preach in series. I usually preach for about an hour, and then we'll have a strong altar call. And then we usually have prayer for teenagers at the end. Kind of similar to this format that's across the street, but we will break away from it more than they will. But we pray with the teenagers at the end until everybody's been prayed for, and they will continue to worship the Lord. We have a second set of worship team members that come up at the end, and they lead us in worship for another hour, 2, 3 hours, however long it takes.
God's just raising up an army of young people that are invading the schools and the streets, and it's magnificent to see what God's doing among the kids.
The Lord spoke to my heart and He said, Richard, I've had a generation that has sought me because they were told that I'd put a pool in their backyard or give them a big car. He said, but I have a generation that's rising up that doesn't care about what I can give them or what I can do for them, but they just want to know who I am.
I just couldn't get to revival enough. That's all I wanted to do. It was late summer, school was approaching, I was a vice principal at Niceville High School, and I just wanted to get to revival. And I would go to revival at night, I'd work all day, go to revival at night, and then my wife would go. So I would go a couple times and she would go. But when the Lord began to impact these kids, and you're living in the shadow of this Brownsville revival where the world is coming, it's going to affect your school. It's going to affect your grocery store. I mean, it's going to affect the community. It just has to. Kids would come up and they'd want to go. They would hear about it. They would see a change in somebody, or a kid that went to the revival would come back and tell them what happened to them at the revival. And so they would want to go.
He, as many know, began to bring bus loads and van loads from Niceville High School, where he was vice principal at. And as a result, there were some parents that began to get concerned, you know, about this following and things that were happening to their teenagers and the freedom that seemed to be happening in their church school. And, you know, their kids are coming home and hearing about kids talking about Jesus. And so they began to bring accusation against Chip and want him to back off, but he wouldn't back off. I mean, he just stood his ground and said, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm within the legal rights, you know, and they're student initiated, student led. I'm just answering their questions. And even when the heat came, he just stood his ground.
One example of what happened was there was a student who had been involved in drugs, alcohol, premarital sex, depressed, and she got saved. She got set free of all that. You know, first of all, she got saved. Jesus is her best friend. She's going to heaven, and her grades go up. Alcohol goes away. Depression, drugs. She's happy as can be. In fact, there's a video of her baptism is videotaped here. Well, here come her parents. Came up to my office and came in to me and stuck their finger in my face, and they said, Dr. Warren, do you know what our child is doing every time we go back into their bedroom? And I said, no, sir, I don't. You know, I don't know. I've never been in your house. They said, well, they're reading their Bible, and it's your fault. And suddenly you begin to realize that there are parents out there who would, no kidding, they would rather their child be on drugs, alcohol, premarital sex than going after the things of the Lord, than being back in their bedroom, reading the Bible. But do I have any regrets for anything that we said or did at night, for high school, for praying with kids, or inviting them to church, or reading the Bible with a child? Certainly not. Certainly not.
It's great to have men of God in positions like that who will make a stand, and they making a difference. They're making a difference. And it's the end of the story is yet to be seen, and Chip Worldwide.